X marks the spot. German or not, the pilot's a human being, I shouted over the general hubbub. So are we. We're not animals. Mrs. Wilcox glared at me, unimpressed. Who are you calling an animal, young lady? What I'm saying, I insisted, is that we should treat him the same way we'd hope they'd treat a pilot of ours. There's a war on you, stupid girl, the fisherman chipped in. An enemy's an enemy. Come here, Olive. Let the adults sort it out. Mrs. Drummond tried to take my arm, but I shrugged her off. Imagine if it was your son or brother or your father, I pleaded. You'd want things done properly, wouldn't you? For a few people that seemed to hit home. There were nods and sounds of approval. Then a hand grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, startling me. Mrs. Wilcox pushed me towards the pilot. Go on then, she snarled, releasing me with such force I stumbled to my knees. You sort it out. The German was so close I caught a whiff of something bloody, sickly, like a butcher shop smell. I could see his injured arm properly now, except it didn't look quite real. It was a bluish-white bone, skin gaping and red like the inside of someone's mouth. The ground tilted beneath my feet, and the next thing I knew, someone had pushed my head between my knees. Mrs. Henderson was beside me, her arm round my shoulders. You had a little faint, lovey. And then a voice, much louder than mine, cut through the noise. What on earth is going on? Everyone fell quiet. Looking up, I saw Queenie, hands on hips, her gaze flitting over the crowd. I felt rather silly for fainting. She spotted Mr. Spratt. Did you allow this to happen? She asked in amazement. Now, just a minute, Mr. Spratt protested. I suggest you watch your tone. Queenie talked over his head. You should be ashamed of yourselves, all of you. People stared at their feet, embarrassed. As Queenie made towards the pilot, Mrs. Wilcox stood in her way. Can I remind you this is my land? And this is my country, Mrs. Wilcox, during a time of war, so I'd advise you to step aside and let me escort the prisoner to where the military police can arrest him. Mrs. Wilcox didn't reply. I gulped uneasily, wondering if the mood of the crowd was about to change again. If you don't move out of my way, Queenie said frostily, you'll be in breach of international law. But with this crowd as my witness, I'll be taking you to the military police as well as our enemy here. The two women squared up to each other. Finally, with a terse sigh, Mrs. Wilcox moved back. The rest of the crowd parted to let Mrs. Henderson and Miss Carter through. They went straight to help Queenie, who was trying to get the pilot to sit up, but even the tiniest movement made him yelp in pain. This arm needs a splint, Mrs. Henderson was saying. The ground swung a bit as I stood up, but as long as I didn't look at the pilot, I was fine. The doctor needs fetching, Olive. Can you manage that? Mrs. Henderson asked. He's called Dr. Morrison. He lives in the last house before the church. I nodded. I knew where it was. Good girl, quick as you can. Glancing over her shoulder, I noticed Queenie crouched beside the pilot, holding his hand. She was speaking to him very quietly. The one word I caught was 9. In a sudden moment of panic, I was sure she was talking about Suki's note, but then I twigged the tone of her voice, calm, clear, sensible. Suki once said we should learn a few German words just in case they invaded us. She taught us no and yes. Please don't shoot. And do you have oranges? So I knew 9 wasn't just an English word, it was a German one too. True to Mr. Spratt's word, by sunset that day the paint job was finished. Budmouth Point Lighthouse now looked like an enormous sandcastle and was probably about as much use as one. Surrounded on all sides by grey sea, grey sky and an even greyer beach, it was devilishly hard to pick it out. It made me even more concerned for the missing boat from France. There were quicksands, rocks, all manner of hazards. Ephraim had told us. How awful it would be to escape the Nazis only to die the moment you hit the Devon coast. As soon as I told Ephraim about the washed-up suitcase, he went off in search of it. Meanwhile, Cliff said he felt iffy, so Pixie belly crawled under the blankets to keep him company, and I sat at the foot of his bed. I saw the German pilot through the binoculars. He was trying to turn the plane so he didn't hit us. Cliff looked flushed in the cheeks. I wasn't sure if it was the excitement of the near miss or a nasty fever causing it. Queenie spoke to him in German, I told him. What do you make of that? Cliff pulled a face. That she's clever? It wasn't as exciting an idea as her being a double agent or spying for Great Britain, but it was probably nearer the truth. I was beginning to be rather in awe of Queenie. She had that quiet authority that made you respect her, even if she wasn't overly friendly. Unlike Suki, she didn't need everyone to like her. In her old baggy sweaters, I don't think she even cared. She simply did what she thought was right and stuck to her guns. It was this, to me, that made her impressive. Queenie's convinced Suki's not involved in any of this, I mused. What do you think? But Cliff had already fallen asleep. For a while I sat listening to the wind as it got stronger, making eerie whistling sounds at the windows. Then I started imagining huge waves crashing over a tiny boat, and whoever's suitcase we'd found clinging on for dear life. Hoping to distract myself, I wrote a quick postcard to Mum. Dear Mum, we went for a walk on the beach today with Ephraim's dog Pixie. She was so well behaved. You won't believe how much she loves Cliff, though this might be because he's always eating. All splendid here, like a holiday. So long, Olive. It was all lies, of course. Stupid, silly lies to stop Mum being sadder than she already was. Writing it didn't slow my churning brain either, so when Ephraim returned with his suitcase and called me to the sitting room, I took Suki's note with me. The suitcase from Vienna sat dripping on the floor. With the oil lamps lit, the stove hot, and the blackouts closed, it should have felt cosy. Yet from somewhere a chilly draught breathed around our necks. The suitcase probably is from the French boat, Ephraim admitted miserably. Or it could mean they're very close, I suggested. Maybe they've landed already. Ephraim shook his head. Looks like it's been in the water for a few days, which made me more afraid than ever to ask about Suki. But I had to know whether Ephraim, like Queenie, thought she wasn't involved. When you wrote to my sister, what did she talk to you about? I asked tentatively. Suki? Ephraim rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. That's not really any of your business, Olive. All this lushy stuff, I said quickly, feeling myself go red. I meant anything about helping people trying to escape Hitler. Actually, she hasn't written to me for a couple of weeks. I don't know what I've done to upset her. I blinked, caught my breath. You don't know she's gone missing? No. He was visibly shocked. It surprised me since discovering their connection. I'd assumed he knew, that he was part of it even. What happened? Tell me. So I told him about the night at the cinema, about the tall man she'd gone off to meet and how I'd followed her till she noticed and got angry with me. I showed him the note. It was a sorry sight, smoke smeared and water stained and still smelling of air raids. Ephraim leaned forward to take it from me, but I didn't let it go. Queenie says Suki's not working with you, I said. I'm pretty sure she is. Ephraim shook his head. She isn't, Olive. Our contact in London was a Mrs. Arby. She was nothing to do with Suki. The name didn't mean anything to me either. I slumped back in my seat. We chose Mrs. Arby. We all chose her, because she was one of the best. Ephraim added, it was such a difficult run, sailing overnight from the northernmost tip of France to here. And now without the lighthouse functioning and this dreadful weather... He stopped dismally, but I was keen to keep him talking. Tell me about the code. How does it work? Ephraim glanced at the note in my hand. I still didn't give it him, and I think he saw my determination. I wanted to crack the code myself. Everything's an opposite, he said. Try it. Spreading the note over my knee, I studied it once again. If the code worked on opposites, then day would be night, and on a clock face the direct opposite of 9 was 3, which must mean day 9 was night at 3. 3 o'clock in the morning, the sort of time people did things they didn't want anyone else to know about. Opposites, I reminded myself, day, night, so the opposite of the alphabet might be numbers. Could A equal 1, B equal 2, right up to Z equals 26? I tried it on the next line of the note. I268TUI, swapping letters for numbers and numbers for letters until I ended up with a different code. It still didn't mean anything. What if the numbers and letters idea worked as opposites from A equals 26 down to Z equals 1? Each line started and ended with a letter. Were they opposites too? I tried swapping A with Z and so on, but that didn't work either. I was stuck again. I went back to the opposites idea. Day, night, light, dark. It still didn't seem to fit. I'd always been rubbish at codes. Last summer holidays, Cliff and his friends invented one. He had to read backwards in the mirror, and I couldn't even break that. They'd hardly expect an important wartime message to be written in simple schoolboy code. Or would you? I looked at the note again. Could the alphabet be a sort of reflection? If you halved it and went backwards, so A became M, which meant the first line read as E268TSE. Now for the numbers. For my brain, this was a bit harder. Keep thinking backwards, I told myself. So I swapped all the numbers for letters, starting from the opposite end of the alphabet with 26 equals A. The result this time was different. Day 9, east, southeast, dark house, lat -5.26, long 0.3 3.6 plus 3.6. I was getting somewhere. The message almost made sense, especially if you remembered that east-south-east was really west-south-west. The last lines, looking like directions on a map, were also probably opposites. It was obvious that what dark house meant. I wasn't sure if any of this was any good news, though. Well? Ephraim asked expectantly. I shook my head. Cracking the code had confirmed my worst fears. She was coming here. The note says dark house and there are numbers like you get on maps. She was on the missing boat. Ephraim frowned. That can't be right. It must be. That man she met gave her the details and she hid them in her pocket and then she lost the coat, didn't she? So your boat, full of visitors, tried to make the crossing without the information. That's why the journey went wrong. Ephraim blew out his cheeks. Well, I asked, that's it, isn't it? No, it isn't. But I did the opposite thing you said and... Show me the note again, Ephraim demanded. This time I handed him the piece of paper. He read it in seconds. What do you think it says? I asked. Ephraim scratched his head so his hair stood up on end. The boat was meant to come here, you're right. But I still can't see how Suki would have got hold of this information. What do we do now? Ephraim stood up. I need to speak to the others, he said, clearly agitated. This changes everything. If the instructions never got to Mrs. Arby in the first place, those poor people might still be in France. I dread to think what's happened to them if that's the case. So do you believe me now? You think Suki's involved? He hesitated. I really hope not. It was a grim answer, for it meant the boat I was certain my sister on was unlikely ever to arrive.